I had learned that Port Haven never truly slept. It only changed shifts. The enormous station stood at the intersection of hundreds of interstellar trade routes, drawing ships and species from almost every corner of known space. Drax merchants argued beside Valari diplomats. Kator financiers negotiated contracts while human cargo crews hurried between docking bays. Humanity was still considered young here. We had entered the galactic community only recently, and our reputation was simple: peaceful, practical, and more interested in trade than war. The older civilizations had spent thousands of years building empires, fleets, and traditions. Humans had spent most of our time trying to avoid another major war. Nobody seemed particularly impressed. At the center of Port Haven stood the Rusted Moon, a crowded bar where representatives from dozens of species gathered every evening. Politics, wars, trade disputes, and rumors passed from table to table beneath the low amber lights. I often came there with my daughter, Lily. She was 8 years old and more interested in fried noodles than galactic politics. That evening, we sat near the back while she drew on her tablet. I drank coffee and watched the room. I was a station security officer. At least, that was what everyone believed. Nobody there knew about the uniform I had worn before. Nobody knew what I had survived. And nobody knew that the quiet human sitting beside his daughter was watching every entrance, every weapon, and every stranger who entered the room. That was how I preferred it. Until the Drax arrived. The Drax entered the Rusted Moon like they owned it. 6 warriors crossed the threshold, armored in dark plates marked with the symbols of old campaigns. The largest among them was nearly 3 meters tall. His name, I would later learn, was Crag Voss. He stopped in the middle of the bar and slowly surveyed the room. Nobody spoke. Crag smiled. "Interesting," he said through his translator. "So this is Port Haven." His gaze settled on a group of humans near the bar. "I have heard humans became very peaceful." One of the humans looked up. "We are." Crag laughed. It was a deep, unpleasant sound. "Peaceful," he repeated. "That is another word for weak." A few Drax behind him chuckled. The humans said nothing. I watched Crag carefully. He was not drunk. He was not confused. His movements were controlled. He had come looking for something. Perhaps a fight. Perhaps an audience. Maybe both. He walked toward the human table and placed one massive hand on its surface. "Do you still remember war?" he asked. One human slowly lowered his drink. "We remember enough." Crag leaned closer. "Then prove it." The room remained silent. I took another sip of coffee. Lily continued drawing beside me, completely uninterested in the exchange. Crag looked around again, apparently disappointed. "You disappoint me," he said. "Your ancestors fought each other for thousands of years. Now you sit in bars drinking and trading." I knew exactly what he was trying to do. He wanted someone angry, someone reckless, someone willing to prove his theory. Nobody gave him that satisfaction. Crag's expression hardened. He turned toward another table, knocking a chair aside with his leg. Still nothing. The silence seemed to irritate him more than an insult would have. Then his eyes found me. I knew immediately that he had noticed something different. Not fear, not anger, just attention. He stared at me for several seconds. I stared back. Lily finally looked up from her tablet. "Dad, it's fine," I said. Crag heard me. His smile returned. He had finally found something he could test. He just didn't understand what he was looking at. Crag Voss walked toward our table. I watched him approach through the reflection in my coffee. His boots struck the floor with slow, deliberate impacts. He wanted everyone to hear him coming. Lily noticed him too. "Dad, is he coming here?" "Probably." "Is he dangerous?" I looked at her. "Not if he makes the right decision." She seemed satisfied with that answer and returned to her drawing. Crag stopped beside our table. Up close, he was enormous. His armor carried scars from battles I recognized from old military reports. The Drax had a reputation for strength, and Crag seemed determined to embody every part of it. "You are human," he said. "Yes, you look very calm." "I am." His mandibles shifted. "Why?" I shrugged. Should I be frightened? Several aliens nearby laughed. Crag leaned closer. Perhaps you should. I looked at his hands. Then at the weapon attached to his belt. Then back at his face. You can leave now, I said. Nobody wants a fight. The laughter became louder. Crag straightened. To him, my words were surrender. To me, they were exactly what they sounded like. A warning. You think you can order me away? No. Then why speak? Because leaving is easier. His expression changed. For the first time, I saw anger beneath the performance. He wanted me to react. I refused. Across the bar, several humans had stopped talking. I noticed one mechanic turn his chair slightly. A pilot at the counter put down his glass. An elderly man near the window watched Crag without moving. None of them said anything. They did not need to. Crag looked around and laughed again. Look at them, he announced. Your people hide behind silence. Nobody answered. His voice grew louder. Where is the human warrior? Where is the strength your species once possessed? I said nothing. He had mistaken restraint for weakness. That mistake was about to become very expensive. Crag stared at me for several seconds. Then he laughed. You speak like a warrior, he said. But you sit like a civilian. I am a civilian. That answer seemed to confuse him. You are security. Yes. Then you should understand what happens when someone refuses to obey a superior force. I looked at Lily. She was still drawing. That mattered more to me than Crag's opinion. I understand perfectly. Crag stepped closer. His shadow covered the table. You have no fear. I didn't say that. You don't look afraid. That's different. He made a low sound in his throat. Around us, the bar had become almost completely silent. Dozens of alien faces watched the exchange. Some were amused. Others were curious. A few looked uncomfortable. The Dracs behind Crag seemed to enjoy themselves. One of them said something in their language. The translator rendered it for the room. He thinks the human has forgotten how to fight. Several aliens laughed. I ignored them. Crag placed both hands on our table and leaned toward me. Stand up. I didn't. His eyes narrowed. Human. I heard you. Then stand. No. The word was quiet. That seemed to bother him more than shouting would have. Crag straightened slowly. You are making a mistake. No, I said. I am giving you one last opportunity. His expression hardened. Opportunity? To walk away. The bar became completely still. Even Lily stopped drawing. Crag looked from me to my daughter, then back again. Something cold entered his expression. He had finally realized that provoking me directly was not working. So he searched for another way. His eyes moved toward Lily. I saw it. I knew exactly what he was thinking before he took his first step. My coffee remained untouched on the table. For the first time that evening, I stopped watching Crag as a nuisance. I started watching him as a threat. Crag moved toward Lily. I stood immediately. Not quickly. Not dramatically. I simply rose from my chair. Crag stopped. The room changed with me. Every conversation ended. Glasses stopped moving. Even the music seemed suddenly too loud. Lily looked up at me. Dad, stay where you are. She nodded. Crag glanced at her, then at me. You finally stand, he said. Yes. His smile returned. I knew you were afraid. No. Then why stand now? I looked directly into his eyes. Because you are walking toward my daughter. The translator repeated my words across the silent bar. Crag's expression became amused. You humans are strange. Probably. You were willing to let me insult you. Yes. To threaten you. Yes. To humiliate your species. I said nothing. And now, he continued, you become serious because of one child? Yes. A few aliens exchanged uncertain looks. Crag seemed almost disappointed. Then perhaps I have discovered your weakness. I took one step forward. You have. He laughed. The sound echoed through the bar. I knew it. He turned toward the room. Look at them. The great human civilization. All that pride. All those stories of ancient wars. And this is what remains. Nobody answered him. Because something else had begun. A chair scraped against the floor behind me. I glanced sideways. A human pilot had stood up. Then another. Then 3 more. Nobody spoke. Across the room, an engineer slowly rose from his seat. At the bar, 2 human mechanics followed. Near the entrance, an elderly woman in a civilian coat stood beside the wall. Crag noticed them. His laughter faded. One by one, more humans began standing. Not shouting, not threatening, just standing. I looked around the room. There were more of us than I had realized. Much more. Crag took one uncertain step backward. For the first time that evening, I saw something new in his eyes. He was beginning to understand that he had not found humanity's weakness. He had found its boundary. I did not tell anyone to stand. I didn't need to. Another human rose near the observation windows. Then 2 more beside the bar. A cargo pilot stood beside his table, followed by a medic wearing an old station jacket. Across the room, a group of engineers quietly pushed their chairs back. Crag looked around. His confidence was beginning to disappear. "How many of you are there?" he demanded. Nobody answered. That was the unsettling part. There was no speech, no battle cry, no raised fist, just movement. Humans were standing everywhere. Pilots, mechanics, dock workers, medical staff, security officers, freight crews. Some were young, others were old enough to remember when humanity had first reached the stars. I recognized several faces: a maintenance technician from Deck 12, a cargo captain who had once spent 6 months stranded beyond the outer colonies, a quiet woman who worked in emergency medicine. None of them looked angry. They looked focused. Crag's warriors shifted uneasily. One reached for his weapon. Immediately, 3 human security officers changed position. Not dramatically. They simply moved. The Drax warrior's hand stopped. Crag noticed. He looked at the exits. There were 6. Everyone now had humans standing nearby. He looked toward the windows. More humans were gathering there. Then he looked at me. "What are you doing?" "Nothing. You are surrounding me. I am standing here." His mandibles tightened. "You expect me to believe this is coincidence?" No. That answer unsettled him more than anything else. I glanced toward Lily. She was still sitting in her chair. I could see the fear in her face now, but she was staying exactly where I had told her to stay. That was enough. Crag stepped closer to her. I raised one hand. Every human in the room stopped moving. The Drax froze. So did the aliens watching us. I looked at Crag. "Don T." He stared at me. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Then Crag reached toward Lily. He made one final mistake. And this time, nobody in the rusted moon laughed. Crag's hand closed around Lily's arm. Everything stopped. I heard someone inhale behind me. A glass slipped from a table and struck the floor, but nobody looked down. Lily froze. "Dad." Her voice was small. I looked at Crag's hand. Then at his face. "Put her down." I said it quietly. There was no anger in my voice. That seemed to confuse him. Crag pulled Lily closer, using his size to shield himself from the humans surrounding him. "You will not give me orders." I just did. His grip tightened. Lily winced. That was enough. I took one step forward. Across the room, every human shifted at the same time. Not toward Crag. Not yet. They simply changed their stance. A pilot moved closer to the nearest exit. 2 mechanics positioned themselves behind Crag's warriors. A medic stepped beside Lily's chair. Nobody shouted. Nobody raised a weapon. Crag looked around and finally understood that the room had become something different. It was no longer a bar. It was a controlled space. Every exit was covered. Every Drax warrior was being watched. Every movement had been noticed. Crag's eyes returned to me. "You think numbers will frighten me?" "No." "Then what do you think they will do?" I looked at Lily again. "Whatever is necessary." The Drax commander laughed, but there was uncertainty beneath it now. "You still refuse to attack?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because she is still in your hands." Crag hesitated. I could see him thinking. He had expected rage. He had expected panic. He had expected hundreds of humans to rush him blindly. Instead, he had found something much worse. Control. He had one hostage. We had every exit. He had 6 warriors. We had hundreds of people who had silently decided that nobody was leaving until Lily was safe. I reached into my jacket. Crag's warriors immediately raised their weapons. I stopped. Slowly, I removed an old metal identification tag. I held it where Crag could see. His eyes fixed on the symbol. The color drained from his face. "You know what this is," I said. He did, and suddenly, the rusted moon became very quiet. Crag stared at the identification tag. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then one of the Drax warriors behind him stepped forward, saw the symbol, and stopped dead. "Commander," he whispered. Crag did not look away from me. "What? That mark? I know." "No," the warrior said. "You don't." His voice had changed. The confidence was gone. He looked at the other Drax. Black Ridge. The name moved through the group like a shock. I had not heard it spoken by an alien in years. The siege of Black Ridge had happened before I joined station security. It had been one of the last major wars humanity fought before entering its long period of peace. The official history called it a defensive victory. The Drax called it something else. A massacre. Not because humans had killed everyone. Because we had survived. Black Ridge was a mining world with almost no strategic value. A Drax expeditionary force had attacked it expecting an easy victory. They had outnumbered the human defenders nearly 10 to 1. The battle lasted 19 days. When it ended, the Drax fleet withdrew. The human defenders remained. Barely. I lowered the identification tag. "My rank was captain," I said. Crag stared at me. "You were there." "Yes." His grip loosened slightly around Lily's arm. "You survived Black Ridge." "Yes." The Drax warrior behind him whispered something in his native language. The translator caught only part of it. "The Ridge Walker." I looked at him. I haven't heard that name in a long time. Crag finally understood. He had not found a civilian security officer protecting his daughter. He had found one of the humans who had survived a battle the Drax had spent years pretending was a victory. I took another step forward. "Put her down, Crag." This time, he did not laugh. He looked at the hundreds of humans surrounding him. Then at his own warriors. Then back at me. His hand slowly opened. Lily slipped free. The medic beside her caught her immediately. And the moment my daughter was safe, I raised one hand. Every human in the bar stopped. Crag watched us in silence. That was when he finally understood the most important thing. We had never needed to attack. We had only needed to decide that enough was enough. Lily was behind me now. I heard the medic speaking softly to her, checking her arm where Crag had grabbed it. I wanted to turn around, but I kept my eyes on the Drax commander. He had released his hostage. That meant the situation had changed. Crag looked at the humans surrounding him. Hundreds of us stood in silence, occupying every space between his warriors and the exits. "You could have attacked," he said. "Yes. Why didn't you?" "Because you hadn't hurt her." His eyes narrowed. "But now?" I looked at him for a moment. "Now you going to leave?" One of the Drax warriors lowered his weapon. Then another. Crag noticed. "You would let us walk away? If you leave peacefully." He looked almost offended by the offer. After everything that had happened, he expected hatred. He expected revenge. Instead, I was giving him a door. That confused him. I understood why. The galaxy had spent years studying humanity through weapons, fleet numbers, military budgets, and battlefield records. They measured strength in ships and soldiers. They had missed the simpler calculation. Humans did not need to be aggressive to be dangerous. We only needed a reason. Crag looked at the identification tag still in my hand. "What happened at Black Ridge?" he asked. I closed my fingers around the metal. "We survived. That is not what our records say." "I know. You destroyed 3 of our divisions. We defended ourselves. You should have surrendered." I shook my head. "That wasn't an option." Crag stared at me. For the first time, I thought he might understand. Black Ridge had never been about winning. It had been about holding. Holding until ammunition ran low. Holding after communications failed. Holding when half the defenders were wounded. Holding because civilians were still behind us. That was what Crag had never understood. He thought humans fought because we loved war. He had mistaken something else. We fought because sometimes there was nowhere left to retreat. And when someone threatened one of our own, we remembered exactly how to stand. Crag looked at me for a long time. Then he slowly released the weapon at his belt. It was not surrender. Not yet. It was calculation. You expect me to believe this ends here? He asked. Yes, you have hundreds of humans surrounding us. Yes, you could destroy my warriors. Yes, and you would simply let us leave? If you don't, give me a reason to stop you. Crag's eyes moved across the room again. He finally understood why the humans had never attacked. There had been no need. Every exit was covered. Every weapon was watched. Every Drax movement had already been measured. The entire room had become a net. And I was standing at its center. One of Crag's warriors lowered his rifle completely. Another followed. Then a third. Crag noticed. You control them, he said. No, he frowned. Then why do they obey? They don't. That answer seemed to disturb him. I looked around the room. The humans were still standing exactly where they had positioned themselves. Nobody was waiting for an order. Nobody was looking at me for permission. They already knew what mattered. Lily was safe. That was enough. Crag looked toward my daughter. Then back at me. What are you? I almost smiled. Human. He shook his head. No. What are you? I understood the question. He wasn't asking about my species anymore. He was asking about the thing behind the uniform, the calm voice, and the old identification tag. I slipped the tag back into my jacket. I am a father. That seemed to confuse him more than anything else. Behind me, Lily spoke softly. Dad? I turned. She was standing beside the medic. I'm okay. I nodded. Good. Then I looked back at Crag. The danger had passed. There was no reason to continue. Take your people and leave. Crag hesitated. Then, slowly, he turned toward the door. His warriors followed. No one stopped them. No one celebrated. No one shouted. As the Drax disappeared into the corridor, the hundreds of humans remained standing. I raised one hand. They began sitting down, one by one, quietly. Within a minute, the rusted moon looked almost normal again. But everyone inside knew it wasn't. They had just seen something the galaxy had spent generations misunderstanding. Humanity had not become weak. It had simply learned when strength was necessary. The footage reached the galactic networks before I left the rusted moon. Port Haven's security system had recorded almost everything. The moment Crag entered, his threats, Lily being grabbed, the humans standing, the silence afterward. Within hours, millions of beings had watched it. They saw what I had seen. Not an army, not a military formation. Ordinary humans, pilots, engineers, medics, traders, mechanics, officers, students, and workers. They had stood because one child was in danger. The first reactions were predictable. Some called it intimidation. Others called it primitive tribal behavior. Several commentators argued that the humans had simply been lucky. Then the analysts began studying the footage frame by frame. They noticed the exits. They noticed how quickly the humans had positioned themselves. They noticed that nobody had drawn a weapon. They noticed that when I raised one hand, hundreds of people stopped moving simultaneously. That was when the discussion changed. I was contacted by 3 different diplomatic offices the following morning. They wanted interviews. I declined all 3. The 4th representative came personally. She was Valari, old enough to have served under 3 different governments. She stood outside my security office and asked one question. Did you plan this? No. Did you expect the humans in that bar to protect your daughter? I looked at her. Yes. She seemed surprised. How could you know? Because they, human. She remained silent for several seconds. That is not an adequate military explanation. It wasn't a military situation. She studied me carefully. Your people are difficult to understand. They heard that before. She almost smiled. Then her expression became serious. Commander Cragg has formally apologized. I nodded. He has also requested that the incident be classified as a diplomatic misunderstanding. That sounds convenient. It is. I looked through the office window toward the station's central corridor. Humans and aliens were still moving through Port Haven together. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had changed. By the end of the week, representatives from older civilizations were quietly reviewing their assessments of humanity. They had spent decades counting our ships. Now they had started counting something else. How many humans would stand when one of their own was threatened? Nobody liked the answer. The attention faded after several weeks, but the questions did not. Governments wanted to know what had really happened inside the rusted moon. They wanted to know whether the humans had organized beforehand. They wanted to know if Port Haven security had issued orders. They wanted to know how many former soldiers had been present. The answer disappointed them. There had been no plan, no command, no emergency protocol, nothing hidden in the station's security network. There had simply been a child in danger. That was enough. The Galactic Council requested my testimony. I went. The chamber was filled with representatives from species that had watched the footage. Some looked curious, others looked cautious. A Valari diplomat asked the first question. Captain Cole, does humanity consider the incident an act of war? No. Was Cragg Voss considered an enemy combatant? No. Then why did hundreds of humans surround him? Because he was holding my daughter. The diplomat paused. You understand that many civilizations would consider such a response disproportionate. I understand. Do you regret it? No. Another representative leaned forward. Would humanity respond similarly if an entire military force threatened one human? I looked around the chamber. Yes. The room became quiet. Even if that force belonged to a major empire? Yes. Even if defending that individual resulted in a war? I thought about the question. Then I answered honestly. If you threaten one of ours, you should understand that we will protect them. That is not an answer. It is the only answer. The representatives exchanged uneasy glances. I continued. Humanity doesn't want war. We don't need conquest. We don't want your territories or your resources. But there is something you should understand. I looked directly at the Central Council. We may tolerate insults. We may tolerate arrogance. We may tolerate people believing we are weak. I paused. We will not tolerate someone harming our own. Nobody laughed. When I left the chamber, no one followed me. For the first time since humanity had entered galactic society, the silence surrounding our species did not feel dismissive. It felt careful. That was the moment I realized the galaxy had finally begun to listen. Port Haven changed after that night. Not immediately. Stations like Port Haven did not change quickly. They had too many laws, too many governments, and too many species arguing over whose traditions mattered most. But eventually, things moved. New regulations were introduced concerning civilian protection. Weapons carried by visiting military personnel were subject to stricter inspections. Threatening civilians became an offense serious enough to involve the council rather than station security alone. The rusted moon became even more crowded. Humans and aliens still drank together. Traders still argued. Diplomats still negotiated. But there was one difference. People watched the humans, not with amusement anymore, with caution. Several governments offered humanity military cooperation. Others proposed defense agreements. A few older civilizations quietly requested access to human military history. We refused most of the offers. We had no interest in becoming anyone's shield. Cragg Voss disappeared from Port Haven soon afterward. I never saw him again. His name remained attached to the incident, however. So did mine. The recording became known across the galaxy as the Night of Standing. I disliked the name. Lily thought it was funny. Years later, She would tell people that hundreds of strangers had stood up because her father told them to. I always corrected her. I didn't tell them. She would smile. I know. That was the part the galaxy struggled to understand. The humans in that bar had not been soldiers following an order. They had not been organized by rank. They had not been waiting for a commander. They had simply recognized the same boundary I had recognized. One of their own was in danger. That was enough. The older civilizations eventually stopped asking how many warships humanity possessed. They began asking different questions. How many humans lived on a station? How many would respond if one was threatened? How quickly could they organize? And, perhaps most importantly, where did their restraint end? Nobody had a satisfying answer. Neither did I. Only knew where mine ended. I had spent years learning how to fight. That night, I had learned something else. Sometimes the most powerful thing a person could do was stand still, wait, and make absolutely certain that everyone understood what would happen if they crossed the line. Years passed, and the story of the rusted moon became something older representatives told their young diplomats. They always described the same moment. One human child was threatened. Hundreds of humans stood. No orders were given. No weapons were fired. An elderly Valari ambassador once told the story to a room of young officials and watched them laugh at first. Then he showed them the original recording. The laughter stopped. He paused the image on the moment when I stood between Crag and Lily. You see, he said, we believed human strength was measured by their weapons. He looked at the silent room. We were wrong. The recording continued. Hundreds of humans stood together, not because they were commanded, but because one of their own was in danger. The ambassador lowered the display. That is what you must remember. Their strength is not that they can destroy us. It is that hundreds of them will stand when one of their own is threatened. He never mentioned what happened afterward. He did not need to. The galaxy remembered, and humanity remained what it had always been. Peaceful, until peace was no longer an option.